Verdansk is back, and it's more beautiful than ever, some would argue. We don't have those day one dark corners where people are invisible or anything like that, despite them trying to scare us with that new rose skin. With this update, there's been so many improvements, and the first big and noticeable thing really is how good Verdansk looks compared to the original. But that being said, there are still a bunch of settings we can change to make Verdansk and Call of Duty in general look even better. And that's both in terms of being able to see enemies clearer, and just the aesthetic in general. Okay, so jumping straight into the graphic settings, the first setting we have is 120Hz refresh rate. We want this enabled to ensure that we can get up to 120 frames per second. Now, to have this option, you do need a monitor or TV that can run 120Hz, as well as a console or system that can run it as well. For example, you don't have this option on PS4 or Xbox One. Now, if you do have a newer generation console or PC and a monitor that can handle it, then you may want to head into the settings and disable the ability to run in 4K. Consoles, for example, simply can't run on 4K and 120 frames per second. And I would recommend having the frames per second over the quality. On Xbox Series X, I run 1440p and 120Hz. So you may want to do the same and copy these settings. Then for brightness, I would recommend running 55. This also does depend on your monitor settings too. For example, there are different settings on some monitors with a bunch of presets. I have mine on frames per second gaming mode, for example, and that comes with quite a high brightness. In addition to this, I have disabled my HDR setting on the console to have more control on the in-game settings. I know a lot of PlayStation players seem to have this issue, but like I say, generally 55 does work very well. Now, just before we get into the rest of the settings, if you want to unlock the brand new Dark Matter, Abyss, and Nebula camos in Black Ops 6, or grind them extremely quickly in bot lobbies, be sure to check out Mitch Cactus. They're the biggest and most reliable in Call of Duty, which will help you grind out the weekly events, camos, and all the unlocks completely legitimately. You can enjoy highly discounted COD points at up to 80% off. They have over 10,000 verified Trustpilot reviews, and you can use code SPRING for 5% off. Okay, now back to the graphic settings. And here we have world motion blur and weapon motion blur. I recommend switching both of these off, just allows us to see much clearer, and then depth of field, switch this off as well. This ensures we don't have any blurriness when we aim in. Then for Fidelity FX CAS, I do recommend switching this on. This gives us sharper images on the screen and reduces some of that blurring that occurs, especially on newer generation consoles. So if you're on new gen, I recommend going 75 with the strength. Older gen, I recommend going maybe 10 or 20. For on-demand texture streaming, put this on optimized. This just gives us the best quality images possible. And then we want to head over to the view tab, and specifically we've got field of view. Now, I always refer to this as not only an FOV slider, but also a frames per second slider, and that goes for whatever console or PC you're on. The higher your FOV, the lower your frames per second are gonna be. And that's simply because there's more of a processing pressure on your system. That being said, I would recommend 112. This ensures that we can see enough around us without putting too much of a processing strain on the system and without things being too small far away. If you are on older gen, then maybe put this down to 105 or 110 just to ensure that you still get a decent frames per second. Then for ADS field of view, put this on affected. This makes it so when we aim in, we still have the field of view setting that we've just put here. Otherwise, it'll default back to about 80. For weapon field of view, put this on wide. It makes the weapon look marginally smaller, ensuring we can see most of the environment as possible. For third person field of view, doesn't matter too much, but 90 is great. And then vehicle field of view, default is fine. For camera movements, put this on least, which is 50%. I just find it super annoying and can even cause motion sickness in some people. And then finally, for this tab, inverted flashbang, it's absolutely fine on off. Now, if you are on console and you're not playing on PC, we don't have access to all of those kind of fancy filters that PCs do have. But that being said, we can go over to interface and do a very quick fix to make basically everything on the game look a little bit better. And that's simply by going over to readability, color customization, and then putting your color filter on filter 2 and the intensity all the way up to 100. This makes images pop and everything just looks a little bit better. You can actually see enemies for once and they're distinguishable against the background. I really do hope you found these settings useful. If you did, please give the video a like, and then why don't you check out these other settings videos to ensure you're hitting Verdansk in peak condition.